Morning, everyone. As Ginger just said, this is the second in the series of diving safety seminars promoting the safe return to diving. So in terms of contents for today, those of you that were in the last one will be familiar with a lot of the content, but this is a different perspective on it, and it's about the early season preparation, both now but for the future as well. I'm going to talk briefly about your role as an instructor in promoting this preparation and talk briefly again about the member presentation resources in the form of the presentation and then the guidance notes that will go along to support that presentation. And then I'm actually going to do a run through of the presentation, not to detail what you would present, but give you some ideas about the kind of things to cover that are reflected in the guidance notes. But I think it just helps to be able to have some background to it to gain some ideas about how you might run it. And then, as I've said, we'll pause for questions at that point, and then finish off by signposting you to a couple of upcoming seminars for the future of this continuing series of safety seminars. So in terms of early season preparation, cover this in the chart in a little bit more detail in the actual presentation. But what we, along with all of the emergency services, are anticipating an early peak in incidents as which will be impacted by the steady and progressive easing of restrictions as a result of COVID-19. And that will be impacted, first of all, by limitations on travel, which will prevent us accessing the most of our open water sites in the early stages, but that'll steadily ease. But there are safety concerns in relation to that, and obviously, if you're going to travel a considerable distance, we need the facilities for accommodation to open up, and then we all need to take account of our own personal circumstances, and that applies to us as instructors, but also to the all divers. And one of the key things that we've been focusing on to now is fitness, but we also need to consider our medical status, and in the context of COVID-19, what our vaccine status is, and how that impacts on our personal attitude to risk of catching the infection or suffering the consequences of having had it. And we also need to consider any personal commitments that we have, whether or not just that we are shielding, but what our responsibilities are for those around us who may be shielding as well, and that we are responsible for. So all of that impacts on when we may feel safe to return to diving, but also those that we are looking to advise. And as a consequence of all of that, whilst it's realistic to expect some peak at the beginning of the season, that return is likely to be spread throughout 2021 and beyond. So the messages here that you need to promote as instructors will be a continuing one, but is equally applicable to anybody that's returning to diving after any break, whether it's COVID related or not. So in that context, what do we consider is your role as an instructor? Well, first and foremost, you need to take account of your own personal preparation for your own return to diving and your own return to providing instruction to make sure that your own fitness and personal skill levels are up to speed again. And that may mean that your initial commitment to instructing might have to be delayed whilst you ensure that you're able to provide the relevant training. But the context of today, what we really want to impress on you is your role in leading the promotion of the preparation to return to diving. So you have a leading role already within your clubs to provide instruction, but this preparation for a return after a gap really falls into our collective responsibilities as instructors. And that extends to club members, but it also extends to your fellow instructors in your club. And a large part of what we're asking you to do to contribute to that is provide advice and support in skills practice, in providing training, which is will require some modification as we'll cover during the rest of the presentation, and for the planning of diving and the integration of training with that planning. So what I've been putting together is at the moment a couple of resources, the first of which is a variant on the presentation that we did a couple of weeks ago, but focused on the diving aspects of it. And what I'm going to do is run through that presentation today, and that should be online next week, early next week. An important consideration for is that you need to tailor it to your own club and the needs of members of your club, or the qualifications and experience. So if you are in a club that's largely or exclusively technical divers, then the message needs to be slightly different to remain consistent and in context. And that's supported in the normal way that you will be familiar with diver training materials, with detailed guidance notes that quite logically support the presentation, and but provides guidance on content, and that content, as I've already said, is highly likely to vary depending on the needs of members in your club and the resources that you can provide. And that content is being reviewed by a couple of national instructors that are attending this presentation today, to capture my spelling mistakes and just review that the content is reflective of the kind of things that we want to be covering, and to make further suggestions. And as a result of that, and again, that won't be available until early next week, once we've refined it and polished it. But as soon as it is, then everybody that has attended today, I'll send you a personal email just notifying you that it is online and how to access it. So if we now go into that diving safety seminar for the preparation for a return to diving. So this is what will be available for you to download from next week. And so it sets out the contents, which are background and COVID-19, particularly in relation to COVID-19, early season preparation, and then expands that in relation to preparing for your fitness, equipment, skills practice, training, and dive planning. And importantly, summarizes at the end what you as an instructor and what the committee of the club are aiming to do to support each and all of those things as appropriate, and then provide at the end an opportunity for discussion of some of the ongoing aspects of it, and for members to contribute to the planning, and then finishes off with links to further guidance, which is, you'll see at the end. So it starts by putting in a context of the long-standing recognition that early season, following a break, there is an identifiable spike in incidence. It used to coincide around the Easter weekend. We saw a decline in that, as you can see from the chart here. The May and June levels were suppressed for 5 years before 2019. But 2019 saw a significant spike in those incidents, which is more consistent with the previous norm. And that we attribute to 5 years of poor weather at the beginning of the year. Whereas last 2019, we saw a long period of settled weather leading up to the beginning of May and June, and that is reflected in that increase in incidence. The 2020 data won't be available until later this year, but would be unrepresentative because it significantly impacted by the restrictions of COVID-19, as you might expect. And this chart is taken from the 2019 incident report, and there are links in the preparation section to the part of the presentation where this is covered in more detail. So rather than trying to cover that, just direct members who are interested to look at that element. But the other thing that we identified was that in May in particular, where there's a similar level of incidence identified compared with August, in May, the more serious level of incidence of DCI and fatalities represented 41% of them, compared to in August, 18% of them of the more serious incidents featured in a similar number of incidents as a whole. And we believe it's reasonable to associate that with a skills deficit and the impact of colder water and a whole host of other things at the early part of the season, whereas by the time you get to August, those skills are at a more refined level. And therefore any incidents that are encountered are more or less serious, easier to cope with, and are consequently what we're seeing is a level of incidents that are consistent with the actual amount of diving rather than any deficits in skills, experience, and that kind of thing. And that's borne out in other activities as well. So we're reasonably confident that that's what we're seeing. But as I've said, 2020 significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And just a brief reminder, and you don't need to go into any detail of this, this is loosely based on the situation in England. Obviously, we appreciate that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the other three areas in the UK of the Isle of Man, Jersey, and Guernsey had different tracks on this, but it serves to illustrate rather than be specific. But what we saw was, what we were able to do is a lockdown in March, May able to do a little bit of shore diving, changes in rules allowed extensions as we went through that, and along to an introduction of tier systems in October, and then a lockdown in November for 4 weeks, slightly different periods for Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales. And then in December in England, Tier 4 introduced, and then January to now, the current lockdown. So the presentation goes on and just gives a visual representation of approximately what that constitutes, showing where the lockdowns are, the red no-go areas, if you like, a period of shore diving capable, a shorter period of boat diving, and an even shorter period where access to swimming pools was possible. But even then, although swimming pools were allowed to open, not everyone did, and the estimates are that about 75% of swimming pools had reopened before the November lockdown, which by definition, some 25% of them didn't, and that impacts on us in terms of ability to provide training and so on. So what we expect, and it's concerning the rescue agencies and other sporting bodies as well as us, is that we expect an early peak in incidents, and that peak will be impacted by a progressive easing of travel limits. So if you're fortunate enough to live by the coast, then your return to diving activity is likely to be easier because you're not traveling significant distances. People inland will be a little bit more limited, but still should be able to access something. For longer trips, for more involved diving, then accommodation and the access to that becomes more important. And I haven't included any specific dates in this because they're all different, and they all need to be applied for your actual location and where the status is at the time. And as I said in the introduction to this, you know, from the point of view of people taking account of their personal circumstances, you need to make it clear to your members that you're aware of the need for being fit, complying with medical requirements, considering their vaccine status, risk attitude to risk, and their own personal commitments in the same way that you yourselves do. So the key messages that we want to start getting across to divers, if they haven't already picked up on it, is first and foremost, the one thing they can be doing now is working on their personal fitness. A lot of the other elements are dependent on that relaxation and actually being able to go back to diving. But in terms of personal fitness, if they haven't already, impress on them the need to start now. But when they do start, aim for a steady build up. So don't encourage them to go out the door and run a marathon right away, or start jogging up and down the street wearing their full diving kit or anything like that. It's important that you advise them on safe and simple exercises that they can be doing, like walking, cycling, running, if that suits them. But slowly build up a level of fitness rather than risking injuring themselves. And also to find something that suits them. And this is a good opportunity to open up the discussion within your club with your members, so that those that have been exercising more than normal can share what they've been doing and the examples that they've got with other members that maybe haven't thought of starting yet because they can't think of anything that suits them. And importantly, to keep it up. And the guidance notes include advice to remind people that the reason that they're doing this is to go back to diving. So encouraging things like couch to 5K or 10K or running the London Marathon all require a level of commitment to do those things that is likely to impact on their ability to have time to go diving afterwards. And that's counterproductive to my mind. So it's worth bearing in mind and thinking about what you're encouraging them to do. And also on the personal fitness side of things, haven't mentioned an awful lot about the medical or the mental well-being aspects that COVID-19 has impacted on all of us to one extent or another. But um, things like exercise, being outside, getting back to the activity that we all enjoy will all significantly help with our own personal mental well-being. And then from a medical point of view, you are all familiar with the medical requirements. The self-declaration process remains the same. But the only thing that's realistically changed is a question about the COVID-19 infection state. And so the UK Diving Medical Committee have produced a score sheet. And one of the things that you can all usefully do, if you haven't already, is to access that score sheet from the UK DMC's website and the associated guidance notes that go along with it to understand why and how the score sheet works, so that you can advise members on the same things. And then the second thing, as far as medical is concerned, is the current state of access to medical referees should the need arise, because they are medical professionals and are either reassigned or very busy within the NHS, or are following their own clinical guidance about minimising unnecessary or less essential face-to-face contact. So at the moment, sort of difficult to access many medical referees. There are some that are still doing medical examinations, but the advice should be that at the very least, if they need to answer yes to any question, including the COVID-19 question, then they should be making contact with a medical referee either by phone, if that's possible, or by email to get an initial indication of what the likely situation is to be, and if at all possible, to plan and program in a medical examination when it's possible to do that. And as things ease and the impact of the vaccine takes over, then that should help improve things. So moving on to equipment preparation, and the medical aspects and the fitness have been being covered in various blogs over recent weeks, and so is the equipment. And the key thing is that divers check out their own equipment. At the very least, check on the current state of it, find out how many mice have been nesting inside your dry suit and nibbling away at it. But deterioration of seals, that kind of thing. And there's links within the guidance on some information about how you can go about checking out your own equipment in a simple way, and the user maintenance tasks that you can do, like lubricating the zips and that sort of thing. And so if you're able to do that maintenance, then great, do that. If you don't feel comfortable at it, then you need to get a service agent to do it. But importantly, the servicing of equipment is a big consideration, and in particular, cylinders are still subject to the same inspection regime. So a hydrostatic test every 5 years, and a visual inspection every 2.5 years. And with the impact of COVID-19 and less diving last year, there will be a number of people out there that haven't checked their cylinders for a while and are going to be surprised to discover that they went out of test during the course of last year, and they need to get them tested before they can use them again this year. And likewise, regulators are subject to being serviced in line with manufacturers' recommendations. And importantly, so are rebreathers. There are elements of rebreathers that are user serviceable, but they are still subject to the electronics and the injectors and things like that, or subject to manufacturing or specialist servicing. And again, the guidance online actually provides a little bit more detail on that, on the kind of things that you need to consider. And the important message, the real important message to get across is, first of all, to investigate what the local service agent status is. So a lot of what are classed as non-essential shops are not allowed to open to the public, but may still be carrying out servicing on a click and collect basis, but all of them are different. Some may actually be furloughed or under a localized grant scheme. And so it's important to establish what the situation is, and then at the very least, book your equipment in for servicing so that as soon as they are able to trade again, then your equipment is in a line and you're not going to be left without it. And so, so that's an important aspect, and I'll come back to that in a little while. And then moving on, so once we are actually able to get back in the water and go diving, then the skill, all of our skills will have deteriorated to an extent. The, the best way of keeping those skills in practice is to be going diving, but there's a limitation on that, obviously, because one way or another, we haven't been able to. So when you're talking to your members, it's important to consider the level, and so the skills fade of an inexperienced, newly qualified ocean diver is likely to be considerably greater than an advanced diver with 20 or 30 years experience. There is still likely to be a level of fade, but it will vary. Not everybody is the same. And so things that we all need to be considering, but divers in your club in particular, is what are your personal skills like, and you can't really judge that until you get back in the water. And I think everybody, because you're all instructors, you will accept that buoyancy control is one of the core aspects of that, and really important to focus on that. So you might expect an advanced diver to need to work a little bit on their trim when they get back in the water, but would very quickly regain their buoyancy control, whereas an ocean diver might be a little bit all over the place, shall we say. So I think that's a core skill, but all diving skills will deteriorate to an extent, especially those that we don't use very much. So useful to consider things like mask clearing, but also the body support skills. So AS skills, control buoyant lift, are skills that when everything's going well, don't need to be or don't get to be practiced. So worthwhile reminding people to practice those. And then particularly for decompression-based skills like DSMB use, which in the past has featured significantly in diving incidents, is again something that you need to practice in control conditions before committing to needing it for real on a decompression dive. And the broad-based guidance is to start shallow. And so that starting shallow might be that you plan to do a simple shore dive to begin with, depending on the level. Dedicate some time at the start of the dive to practicing skills and then go for an exploratory dive once you're comfortable again. For more experienced divers, it might be a variant on that. But starting shallow is a good principle. And then if you've got rebreather divers in your club, then you might need to encourage them to think about things that will have been in the training but may want some revision. You're dealing with more complex kits, so use of checklists is strongly recommended. And then the kind of things that they should practice would include the failure responses, to take them back to a reminder of what to do in those kind of emergencies. And as they practice the skills, and this is so if you're talking about in the open circuit diver, an ocean diver might practice their skills initially stationary, but the objective should be for everybody to be able to do all of the skills neutrally buoyant. Even more important for your rebreather divers to be practicing those failure responses whilst neutrally buoyant and potentially on the move as well. And then that leads into consideration of training. So with less diving going on and swimming pools being closed and all of that kind of thing last year, then the conduct of training has suffered somewhat. Again, it'll vary depending on what you've been able to achieve within your own clubs. But from a diver's point of view, the personal status that you should encourage your members to consider their own personal status. Where are they in the scheme of things? So if they're in training, then what stage of that in training are they at? If they're open water divers or equivalent, then are they undergoing training for the next level or something else? And similarly, the progression as you go through for sports diver, dive leader, and beyond, and those personal stati will impact on the kind of things that they need to focus on. And the first important question is the level that they've attained, have they retained that level? Because that will impact on whether or not you need to refresh, regroup those skills, responsibilities, and everything. And that splits out broadly into three areas. So in the context of refreshing, an ocean diver that hasn't had a lot of diving, or an ocean diver trainee that hasn't had a lot of diving experience, may need to refresh the theory because, as we all know, that putting into practice consolidates that theory knowledge at that level, because you understand why that level of theory has been applied, and by putting it into context, it consolidates that knowledge. But if they've not been able to put it into practice, then there may be a need for refreshing that theory. Similarly, if they've done the training in the swimming pool, then but not yet moved to open water, again, they haven't perhaps had the opportunity to consolidate that. And the extent of the open water training. So if they've done, if they've not completed ocean diver, but they've done 3 or 4 dives, how much of that previous level do you need to refresh before moving on to the final elements? Because Ocean Diver in particular very much focused on developing that buoyancy control and the simple skills. But if they got signed off for their initial buoyancy control lesson and mass clearing at the early parts of last year, it still bears them refreshing that and practicing that again, if for no other reason than to give them some additional confidence before finalizing the whole thing. And then having established those kind of things, and this particular one is well suited to a discussion amongst the group, then as their instructor or as part of the instructor team is agree a plan of how the club are going to support that. And then the final thing as far as highlighting to divers in the club, the kind of thing is that they're all trained to one extent or another about dive planning. So ocean divers are given some very simple levels, and then as you progress through sports diver and dive leader, there is a steady increase in the ability and the skills necessary to plan diving for other people. And so the important to impress on them because of the nature of the gap and the risk that that presents is to plan for a simple start to get back in, refresh those skills, and plan to start shallow, to limit challenges, and useful to invite the audience at this stage to highlight what some of those challenges might be. And certainly early parts of the season, cold water is going to be a factor. So south coast of England, the seawater temperature is going to be around about 10 degrees. West coast between 6 and 8 degrees, and east coast, particularly east coast of Scotland, 4 to 6 degrees. So that's going to have an impact, especially when it comes to refreshing skills. Refreshing being the operative word on things like mass clearing. And then limiting the challenges associated with spring tides. And that was always one of the factors of the Easter bank holiday, in that because of the nature of how and when Easter appears, it is always a spring tide because it's tied in with the lunar calendar rather than the year calendar. And obviously that impacts on currents, so easier to minimize the challenge of diving in very strong currents. Purvey's a little bit more difficult to prepare for. Diving after storms, you can expect purveys. If we get a good period of weather, then the plankton blooms impact on it, but you still can plan for some aspects of that and mitigate for it. And obviously monitoring the weather. So my long range forecast is permanently set on the Easter weekend, upcoming Easter weekend, so that I've got some concept of how things are going to develop with that. And part of the planning should include planning for the skills that you need to check, the planning for a site that will be suitable to allow for that. So if you are a dive leader, advanced diver, instructor, planning a diving trip for other people, then you need to be taking into account that what facilities they need to be able successfully check their own personal skills, and everybody, to build progressively and not immediately expect to be able to repeat the diving that we were doing 12, 18 months ago, or even 6 months ago. So from the point of view of yourselves as instructors, the thing to get across to your audience is what support you are going to be able to provide. And that may vary depending on your own personal commitments, but that we don't intend you individually to address the entire club, but you're speaking on behalf of the other instructors in the club. So the kind of things that you can offer are, in terms of dive organisation, taking into account the need to prepare. And this presentation forms an integral part of that. So raising the awareness, and then from that discussion, building a plan to address appropriate training and support the skill development. And important that you aim that as all levels, that you don't, everybody feels involved, that you're contributing evenly as much as possible to everybody else. And then provide in relation to the skills practice, through the presentation, through your own commitment, to promote the practice of skills, particularly at the early stages of returning, and to provide and support and feedback, constructive feedback on how people are doing, where the opportunity arises. So planning to have an instructor buddy, an ocean diver in the one of the early dives back, so that you can supervise and demonstrate the skills necessary and provide improvement as you progress along. And then obviously one of the key roles of an instructor is to provide training, and so looking at the aspects that you can contribute to. So if you've been offering online theory training during the lockdown, then great, well done. And I know an awful lot of clubs have. But if you haven't, then now's an opportunity to identify what skill theory training people need, and use a seminar like this to offer that as catch up. Or if ocean divers trainees just need a refresher of key points that they may have lost out on, then again you can do that. Alternatively, there are the e-learning facilities for ocean and sports diver currently, and that will be developed further for all of the other grades. And most people can't have failed to notice that dive leader and advanced diver lectures in particular have been being offered online, and many of them have been recorded as well and are available on the website as a means of refresher. So there's lots of options there, and whether or not Zoom learning continues once we get back to a more normal life, but I think the opportunity is there, and if there's one thing that has grown considerably over the period of lockdown, it is that online learning opportunity. In the context of training, the next formal level that we are likely to be able to do, because swimming pools won't open in the early stages, is to continue open water training, and so again investigate what stage your members are at, and one important consideration is that if you've got ocean diver trainees that have completed sufficient pool training previously, to allow them to progress to open water as discovery divers, then they could continue that first couple of open water lessons with the skills that they've got now. You might need to spend a little bit more time initially refreshing those basic skills in the open water, but it shouldn't necessarily hold them back at this stage until they can and help with their motivation and their commitment as well considerably. And then obviously when swimming pools begin to reopen, I think at stage 3, then you potentially can restart the training there. And one of the key things for instructors, but more importantly for the club officers, is to be making contact as soon as possible with the pool authorities that you use and liaise with them to minimise the delay in reopening facilities not so they're likely to reopen for swimmers first and not necessarily user groups. So the more you can negotiate with them and reassure them that we do understand what we're doing, we are capable of managing the risk and working with the pool authorities, that the easier that will be to open up. And of course, the limits on what you can do on an instructor are limited only by what your club members want to achieve in training and your personal time commitments to do that, and while still allowing yourself time to go diving as well at some point. And then moving on to branch officers or the committee, if you like, there are roles that they can play. Now, in terms of the presentation, whether or not you wanted to hand over this session to the diving officer, training officer, or somebody else, one of the committee members, if that's not you, then I think that's a good time to change the voice, if you like. And so in terms of fitness of club members, having the club promote the fitness message, I think is a really good thing to do. Having a communication method that allows for the sharing of what people do, whether or not you've got an app on your phone that allows you to download your route and your time and then have that as a sort of mini non-competitive league table, is something that the club can help promote. And again, similar to instructors, advise on the importance of fitness and perhaps lead by example. But usefully serve as the conduit, if you like, for encouraging members to share their ideas, examples, and then promoting that to other members, so that that it provides a lot more options, and then provide advice on the medical and inevitable medical questions. So really that would come down to having an understanding of what that COVID-19 scorecard is. It's not any of our role to give specific advice on any medical question. And unless even if you're a qualified doctor, you can only provide general advice. And the system that we rely on is that if anybody has to answer yes to any of the questions, then they need to seek advice from a specialist who has not only medical knowledge, but diving specific medical knowledge, and the medical referees are also required to be divers of at least dive leader or higher standards, so that they understand all aspects of it and are best placed to provide advice and guidance to people that are answering yes to those questions. And really the driving force for that process is, as far as possible, to ensure that people aren't prevented from diving, because of a preconception about any particular condition, and the changes in recent years over attitudes to diabetes, to asthma, where historically people were automatically prevented because of the work of the specific medical referees. Those have changed, and the view is different. And then on the context of equipment, then obviously if your club has their own equipment, then reassuring members, particularly trainees, that that equipment is being serviced, and it is not going to impact on their access to training simply because all of the club cylinders are out of test, or the regulators aren't fit for purpose and haven't been serviced. Reassuring that that is happening is an important part of it. And if you've got a club boat and you're fortunate to have one, the same, that boat preparation is underway, or so that the boats are ready for use when the time allows. And if your club has negotiated a discount for club service and a club kit because of the amount of it, have a discussion with your service centre and establish whether or not, if you submit club members equipment for servicing at the same time, can it benefit from the same discount or not? And if that's the case, then it's a really good way of demonstrating how your club can help contribute to the benefits of your members. And then continuing with the branch officers side of things, one of the key things to my mind, about member support is communication, and whether or not you've regularly communicated with your members throughout the last 12 months. If you have, great. Reassuring people that you're still there is an important thing, and although it's difficult, a huge number of clubs have been using social media and Zoom meetings and the like to keep in contact with their members, and the thanks to Holborn Club for being able to use one of their pictures of what they've been doing during that period of time. But there are lots of other good examples. But what I would say is, now more than ever, in preparation for the lead up to that return to diving, getting in contact with your members, reassuring them that they will be able to get back to diving, and what you are going to do to support that is really, really important. And then reinforce what's already been said on the training side of things, but the committee commit to supporting the instructors in their activities, and then aim to map and develop a plan for all members, so that when you're planning your diving, then you take account of all of your membership, and in particular plan to meet training needs, and set out a time frame for that. And one of the things that that I would suggest you do at this stage is to just have a discussion with the members at that time, and find out a rough extent to how much training is necessary, how many ocean diver trainees are yet to complete from last year, and commit to finalizing them before you take in a new intake, and put further commitment on your instructors. And then obviously a big role of the diving officer's role is to organise diving, and so part of that will be to plan a progressive return to diving, so that for the less experienced people, that control and management of taking a slower, shallower approach is being done for them. And once again, share and promote ideas, and to plan and support appropriate training. So and the presentation then goes on to open a more broader discussion with members to allow them to contribute their views, although the guidance recommends that you interact with them throughout. But the slide gives you some of the prompts to inform that discussion. So what we want to do is look forward to a safe return to diving. The part of that is to catch up with training as for everybody's benefit, and to encourage all divers to plan appropriate training, share and promote ideas with examples, and promote development. And so there's an opportunity there to have a less structured but discussion, but with a framework to work to. And then finish off after the discussion with signposting to the key resources, so the preparation for return to diving, and the link is there, and the existing COVID-19 guidance that will continue to be reviewed and updated since I wrote it, starting this time last year. With the exception of the status document, which seemed to change 3 times a day, the core of the guidance has remained pretty much the same with very little amendment, but it remains under review, and the preparation for return to diving guidance is still being developed and expanded. And the next phase is due hopefully next week, which is a little bit more detail on that skills practice. And then it finishes off with a link. So in terms of the presentation that you're going to be provided, that broadly is it. And so in the context of this presentation, this is your opportunity to well, the questions that I've seen a lot of you posing along the way, Jen should have been collating. The resources for the COVID-19 guidance are on BSAC.com, COVID safe diving, and the developing resources for preparation for return to diving are also on the website. And then the upcoming seminars, for the safety seminars, there's a couple being offered by John Pyler, who's the NDC safety group lead, which are based around the research projects that the Diving Diseases Research Centre have been doing over the last 12 years. So the first one on the 23rd of March is on broadly the health of divers research topics program, which formed the sort of mini lecture sequence that we had available a number of years ago and are under review at the moment. But what he's going to be doing is linking some of the lessons that have been learnt from that to the current situation with COVID-19 and the implications that it has for that preparation for returning to diving. And the second one is on a new research project that they've started in the last 12 months in relation to technical diving, and it asked the question, is technical diving just different kit? But it's looking at the health related aspects of it, which I fully expect will be an incredibly interesting discussion but again, John intends to relate it to some key messages from this preparation for return to diving. There is an intention to do some further safety seminars in following on from this one, but I haven't finalised what they're going to be. I have a couple in mind, but if you keep a lookout on the safety seminar webinars section, as soon as we finalise one and have dates available, it will be advertised on there. Okay, so that's it from me. So thank you all very much for attending and paying attention. And as soon as the resources are available for download, I'll let you know. And good luck with presenting them.